She had already packed when the gavel came down. The white chalk was first, one worn stick that fit between two fingers, the kind survey teams used to mark hull scoring in the field. Then the paper star map, folded in quarters. Then nothing else. Consul General Arena Rask closed the satchel's clasp while Prime Arbiter Thulmora was still speaking, and the sound of the clasp, small, metallic, final, carried farther than it should have in the silence of the zenith spire. Thulmora did not pause. He stood at the podium at the center of the chamber, all 3 meters of crystalline height, catching the cold blue light from the spire's ceiling panels, his liquid metal robes moving slowly, even though nothing in the room was moving. His hands were flat on the podium's surface. They were always flat when he was rendering a final judgment. Pursuant to Article 61 of the Mandate Charter, he said, in the synthetic dual tone that never sounded like it was coming from any one place, the United Earth Consul General's transit access credentials are hereby permanently revoked. Effective this session. No appeal period. No grace interval. He did not look at Rask. He never did. Additionally, the 4 human industrial installations in the Core Ward cluster are reclassified under the Abandoned Asset Clause and transferred to Mandate administrative custody. Immediately. 112 systems were watching. The broadcast was live to every seat of governance the Mandate controlled, carried on channels that reached ships, stations, and colony hubs across an arm and a half of the galaxy. Thulmora knew this. He had chosen this moment to make the ruling public rather than administrative precisely because of what it meant to every species watching. That humanity, which had never truly belonged, was now simply gone, filed and filed away. For 2,000 years, exile from the network had meant death. No transit, no trade, no rescue. A species cut from the gate network did not negotiate. It starved. Rask adjusted the satchel strap on her shoulder and stood up. The nearest delegate, a Velhari observer in the second row, dropped his stylus. It hit the floor and did not stop rolling for a very long time. Nobody else moved. Consul General Rask, Thulmora finally looked at her. You have no grounds to. I know, she said. I'm not arguing. She picked up her chair with one hand, set it neatly back against the table, and walked toward the exit at the back of the chamber. Her footsteps did not echo. The chamber was too well insulated for that. But the delegates in the gallery watched her cross the floor the way you watch something you can't quite categorize, not in distress, not in a hurry, just done, just walking out. At the door, she stopped. She did not turn around. We won't be using your roads anymore, she said. Then the door closed behind her. No plea, no counter-motion, no declaration of war. Humanity's official response to the permanent erasure of its place in the interstellar community lasted 11 words and took under 30 seconds to deliver. Stay close. What she does next is the part nobody saw coming. That was how it ended for Rask inside the Zenith Spire. What came before it was 41 years and a different kind of darkness entirely. She had taken her first deep void posting at 28, fresh from the cartography corps, assigned to a survey run through the outer spiral where the gate network had 3 gaps totaling 11 light-years each. The mission profile called for 18 months. She served 4 tours. The voids she was mapping were not empty. They were threaded through with what the Mandate classified as the null current, a web of gravitational tides so chaotic and unpredictable that the Mandate's best navigational models had simply refused to engage with them. Unnavigable. That was the word in every Mandate filing on the subject. Unnavigable by design because the math said so, and the Mandate trusted its math the way Thulmora trusted his flat hands, completely and without revision. Rask trusted her chalk. She marked tide nodes on paper because paper couldn't be remotely accessed. She triangulated current patterns by hand because a physical calculation couldn't be spoofed. Over 4 tours, then 8, then a gap year, then back again, she built a map that existed in no database the Mandate could reach. A map of the unmapped, a road through the unnavigable. She was 40 years into it when she was appointed Consul General. She brought 2 things to the role, the map and the chalk to update it. Thulmora had looked at her appointment file and noted, in his pre-session briefing to the Inner Council, that humanity had selected a cartographer as their chief representative. He found it provincial, quaint, the kind of choice a species made when it still needed a physical tether to the things it built. He was not wrong about the tether. He was profoundly wrong about what it meant. The 48 rotations, after the Exile edict, were quiet. Not tense quiet, the kind where something is about to crack, just quiet, like a room someone has tidied and left. Across the human worlds, the trading posts near the gates did not light their beacons. The diplomatic frequencies went static. The cargo queues that normally stacked up in the gate approach corridors were empty. Sub-Monitor Virin of the Vesperian Telemetry Division checked them 3 times in the first week and could not find anything wrong with his instruments. There was nothing wrong with his instruments. There was simply nothing there. Virin was a precise creature. He had 4 bioluminescent ridges running down the back of his neck, and they pulsed when data models failed to predict outcomes. By the end of the second rotation after the Exile ruling, they were pulsing constantly. He had built a projection model for how a species cut from transit access would behave. It was a standard model, used for every prior Exile event in Mandate history, and it had never been wrong. Cut a species from the gates, and within 72 hours you see distress broadcasts. Within a week, you see unauthorized gate approach attempts. Within 2 weeks, you see a delegation. He was seeing none of those things. The Sol system gates were powered down, not locked, not quarantined, powered down from the inside. Someone had gone to each of the 12 gates in human-controlled space and switched them off manually. The codes used to shut them down were internal human administrative codes, not mandate override commands. Humanity had, entirely voluntarily, locked itself out of its own gate access. Virin filed a report. His supervisor told him to rerun the sweep. He reran it. Same result. The gates were dark and humanity had done it to itself. They're posturing, his supervisor said. They'll break before the 4th rotation. Watch the distress frequencies. Virin watched. By rotation 12, the distress frequencies were still empty. He began running secondary sweeps on the deep void bands, the frequencies nobody used for anything, the ones that occasionally picked up long-period gravitational noise from the null current. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. He was sure that the human fleets, dozens of them, which ought to be pressing against the inside of the locked gates like water behind a dam, were simply absent. No gate approach signatures, no drive signatures near the wells. The ships were not at the gates. The ships were not anywhere his instruments could find. At rotation 20, Virin drafted a second report. He titled it Anomalous Absence, Human Fleet Distribution. He marked it urgent. His supervisor marked it speculative and filed it in the secondary queue. At rotation 30, the Mandate Inner Council voted to deploy the First Descendant Armada. 3,500 dreadnoughts, the Mandate's enforcement branch, designed not for war in the traditional sense, but for what the Council called pacification. The conversion of a resisting world into a compliant one through the application of overwhelming, undeniable force. The First Descendant had not been used in full strength in 600 years. It did not need to be. Its existence was usually enough. The order was simple. Move through the gates to the human core ward cluster. Establish mandate authority over the 4 newly reclassified industrial worlds. Accept the human surrender that would, inevitably, follow. Thulmora's hands were flat on the podium when he signed the order. His neck-equivalent biology showed no stress indicator at all. He was entirely certain. Virin watched the Armada enter the gate network from his telemetry station. 3,500 drive signatures moving in formation, carrying the full weight of mandate authority through the only roads that connected the stars. He checked his anomalous absence report one more time. His neck ridges were pulsing so fast they had blurred into a solid strip of cold blue light. Somewhere in the dark between the stars, in the currents the Mandate had declared unnavigable, something very large was moving. He had no idea how large. The sweep came back wrong at rotation 42. Virin had been running it on a 6-hour cycle, watching the same empty approach corridors, the same dark gate housings, the same absence where a civilization's traffic should have been. At rotation 42, the sweep returned clean on the gate frequencies, and through an anomaly flag on a band, he had added to the rotation almost as an afterthought. Deep void, long period gravitational. The frequency range where the null current's tidal noise usually sat, slow and structureless, and totally uninteresting. It was not structureless now. He ran the flag through 3 filter passes before he accepted what it was showing him. The gravitational signature was not random tide noise. It was organized. Multiple point sources, each one consistent with a drive system under load, each one moving on a bearing that did not correspond to any gate approach vector, because they were not approaching any gate. They were moving through the null current itself, through the region every mandate navigation model classified as impassable, and they were doing it in formation. Virin sat very still for a moment. His neck ridges went solid blue. He counted the signatures. He stopped at 40, not because there were only 40, but because the band's resolution was not designed for this kind of reading, and the further signatures were blurring into each other. There were more. He could not tell how many more. He flagged the report critical, marked it for the inner council's direct attention, and transmitted it. It reached his supervisor's queue. His supervisor was in a session with the Armada's logistics division, finalizing the transit schedule. The report sat for 11 hours before anyone opened it. By then, the first Descendant Armada was already 3/4 through the gate network. 400 drive signatures moving in tight, disciplined formation, carrying the authority of the mandate toward a civilization that, according to every projection model on record, was sitting in its gravity wells, dying quietly, waiting for someone to offer it a way out. What Virin did not know, and could not have known from his station, was what the null current displacement signatures looked like from inside. The UNS Harrow was a survey vessel, or had been once. It was not a large ship. It had not been designed to carry weapons. What it carried instead was a set of gravitational capacitors the size of a small building, packed into a hull that had been reframed and reskinned twice in the last decade to accommodate the load. It also carried a crew of 61, most of them former cartography corps, and a mission profile that said transit survey and meant something else entirely. Commander Solon had served under Rask in the Outer Spiral 22 years ago. He knew what the chalk was for. Current status, he said, not looking up from the navigation table. The table was physical, paper overlays on a light board, with grease pencil marks where the latest current readings had updated the route. Bearing holds, his navigator said. We're 20 minutes from the intercept window. Run it. The Harrow had been tracking a mandate courier vessel for 6 days, a fast diplomatic runner crossing the outer edge of the null current on a route that came within 4 light hours of the current's navigable lane. The runner was carrying data, specifically a packet of updated Armada deployment coordinates and a set of mandate administrative codes for the 4 seized industrial worlds. Data the Armada would use when it arrived. Data that, if it did not arrive, would force the Armada to fall back on its original approach vectors rather than the updated ones. Contact in 12, the navigator said. The courier never saw them. The Harrow ran cold, minimum power, no active signatures, and the null current's gravitational noise ate the rest. Solon watched the intercept window open on his board, gave one quiet order, and the Harrow's bow array sent a single tight-band pulse into the courier's drive management system. Not a weapon, a frequency. The courier's navigation core hiccuped for 4 seconds and then rebooted from backup, but the data packet, which had been mid-transmission to a relay buoy, fragmented, unrecoverable. The courier continued on its route. It would arrive at the Armada's pre-gate staging point with a corrupted packet and no way to know exactly what had been lost. Solon made a mark on the paper overlay, 1 line. Then he said, "Bring us back to bearing," and went back to watching the current. The Harrow slipped back into the dark without leaving a signature, the mandate's instruments could read. The first Ascendant Armada came through the gates clean, 3,500 drives lighting up in sequence as each ship crossed the transit threshold, formation tight, bearing set for the core ward cluster. Fleet Commander Oris stood at the command rail of his flagship, the Sovereign of Edicts, and watched the readout as his fleet assembled on the far side of the transit. He was a patient commander, methodical. He had run 9 pacification operations across his career and understood their shape. You arrive in force, you broadcast your terms, the subject species looks at what it is facing and makes the only rational calculation available to it. There was no drama in it. There was only arithmetic. The core ward cluster resolved on the long-range board. 4 industrial worlds, all showing minimal energy signatures. No orbital defense grids active. No fleet traffic in the approach lanes. Oris almost felt sorry for them. "Passive sweep," he said. "Full sector." The sweep came back in 30 seconds. His sensor officer read the result, stopped, and read it again. "Commander," the officer's voice was level, but it had gone careful in a way Oris noticed. "I'm showing mass signatures in the outer approach band, bearing 27 Mark 11, multiple contacts." "Define multiple." A pause, the kind of pause that happened when a number was too large to say easily. 1,400, sir, give or take. Oris did not move from the rail. 1,400 what? Ships, sir, running dark, positioned in the outer band. Another pause. They were already here. He crossed to the sensor board himself and looked at the plot. 1,400 contacts, arrayed in a spread formation that covered the outer approach to all 4 industrial worlds simultaneously. Not desperate, clustered near one gate or one world. Spread, deliberate, waiting. They had not come through any gate Oris controlled. He knew every transit signature in his sector, every approach vector available through the network. None of them explained this. These ships had not come through the network at all. He stood at that board for a long moment. "Hail them," he said finally. The hail went out on standard frequencies. There was no response for 40 seconds. Then the channel opened and a voice came through, a human voice, female, unhurried, and it said 4 words. "We see you, Commander." That was all. The channel closed. Oris looked at the plot again, at the spread, at the coverage, at the way the contacts were positioned not to threaten his fleet, but to make a statement about what was possible. No distress signals, no begging, no defensive clustering near the worlds they were supposed to be protecting. Just 1,400 ships that had no business being here, in a configuration that suggested they had been here long enough to be comfortable. He put his hands on the rail and looked at the board for another 10 seconds without speaking. Then he said, quietly, to no one in particular, "Where did they come from?" It was not a question. It was the sound of an arithmetic problem that had just produced an impossible answer. Across the sector, in every system the mandate had believed was locked, silent, and dying, the lights were already on. The second hail went out at Oris's order, and the silence that came back was the same silence as before, not the silence of absence, but the kind that meant someone was listening and had decided not to answer yet. He gave it 30 seconds. "Targeting solution," he said. "The human flagship." He did not enjoy this. He was not a man who enjoyed the application of force. He was a man who understood it as the final argument in a conversation that had already run its course. The human fleet was here without authorization, in space the mandate had reclassified, representing a civilization that had been legally and formally erased from the network. He had offered them a channel. They had given him 4 words and closed it. He had his orders and his mandate, and 3,500 drives behind him, and in front of him, a fleet that had no right to be here and no leverage by which to stay. Fire! The Caloris Basin caught the thermal barrage across her port quarter. Commander Yale Doran had been standing at the navigation console when the alert board lit red across every station simultaneously. She had time to say one word, "brace," before the first strike hit. The ship did not shake the way civilian craft shook. It groaned, a long structural complaint that traveled up through the deck plating and into the soles of her boots. Then the pressure differential hit as the outer hull gave way on 3 decks, and the emergency doors came down in sequence, and the sound of them sealing was very loud and then very final. She looked at the board. 3 decks vented. The people on those decks, the ones who had been at their stations, running the passive sensor array, managing the gravitational capacitors, were gone. Not wounded. Gone. The number on the board was exact, and she did not look at it for more than a second because she had a ship to hold together and 30 more seconds of exposure before her captain made the call. Captain Ruiz's voice came over the shipwide channel, flat and controlled. Damage report. The board said what it said. Doran read it back without inflection. Port quarter compromised. 3 decks sealed. Gravitational array at 60%. We are still in position. Hold position, Ruiz said. The Caloris basin held. On the command deck of the Sovereign of Edicts, Oris watched the human flagship take the strike and not move. It did not break formation. It did not turn toward the gate. It did not broadcast a distress signal. He had expected, if not a surrender, at least a reaction. A formation shift. Some sign that the arithmetic had registered. The human flagship held its position and said nothing. Hull breach confirmed, his sensor officer said. Their outer plating on the port side is. I see it. He cut her off. He was watching the rest of the human fleet, all of it. 1,400 ships spread across the outer band, and not one of them had moved since he fired. They were still sitting exactly where they had been, watching. He had a feeling, very suddenly, that he was the one who had made a mistake. Open their channel, he said. Now. Rask was on the Caloris Basin Bridge when the channel opened. She had been there since the fleet left the dark lanes, sitting in the observer's seat at the back of the room with her satchel across her knees. She had been watching the Mandate Armada's formation on the passive display and drinking a cup of water she had poured 10 minutes ago and not touched. She set it down when the alert board lit. She watched the board through the strike and the sealing doors and the damage report. She did not stand up. When the channel opened, and Oris's voice came through, asking for terms, she reached into the satchel and wrapped her fingers around the chalk. Just to feel it, that was all. Then she stood up, walked to the front of the bridge, and addressed the open channel. Fleet Commander Oris, you have fired on a human vessel in open space. You have killed human crew on a mission of transit under the terms of the original integration charter, the one your arbiter did not formally dissolve before issuing the Exile order because he believed there was nothing left to dissolve. She paused once. He was wrong about that. You have given us a treaty breach on record. We don't need anything else. She looked at Captain Ruiz. Ruiz nodded. Fleet, Rask said on the wide channel. Weapons free. 3 words, no triumph in them, no anger, just a door opening. The spatial friction emitters had no visual signature. That was the first thing Oris noticed. He was watching for missile tracks, for energy beams, for anything his point defense systems could read as a threat vector. The human ships simply oriented slightly, almost imperceptibly, like flowers turning toward a light source, and then the Mandate fleet's own drive signatures began to do something they had never done before. They began to disagree with their housings. It was Oris's chief engineer who understood it first. She had been watching the drive core readouts when the resonance pattern started, and she had exactly 4 seconds to process what she was seeing before she started shouting. Commander, their drives are generating a counter-frequency. It's targeting our FTL rings specifically. It's using our own drive output as the energy source. I can't. A pause. I can't counter it with anything I have. Oris was already at her station. He looked at the readout. The resonance was clean, not a brute force attack, but a precise, surgical frequency that was finding the mechanical tolerance between the FTL ring housing and the drive manifold and vibrating it at exactly the wrong interval. Not damaging the hull, not damaging the crew compartments, not damaging life support or communications or anything that kept his people alive. Just the drives. He had time to say all ships, emergency shutdown on FTL systems, before the first ring separated. It came off the hull of a ship 3 positions to his starboard, a clean shear, the ring detaching from the manifold at the mechanical joint, drifting free of the hull in one piece, as if it had been designed to do exactly that. Then the ship next to it. Then the one behind. The emitters were not firing sequentially. They were firing simultaneously, and the resonance was propagating through the formation, because the Mandate's fleet was designed to operate in tight coordination, drives synchronized for formation transit, and that synchronization was now working against them. The frequency was traveling ship to ship along the drive harmonics like a note through a tuning fork. Oris watched his entire formation come apart in the space of 14 minutes. No explosions, no hull breaches on his ships, no crew casualties that he could see on the board, though he knew some would be injured by the sudden loss of drive power and the mechanical vibration. The FTL rings came off clean and drifted in the space around the fleet, catching the light of the system's star, and the Armada, the first Ascendant Armada, the force that had not been deployed in 6 centuries because its existence was enough, was now 3,500 ships with no way to move faster than sublight, no way to reach a gate, no way to go home. Virin's report. Virin's urgent, secondary queue speculative report, the one about the anomalous absence, the one nobody had read in time. Ori sat down in his command chair. He sat there for a long moment and looked at the board, and then he looked at the space around his fleet, and then he understood something that he suspected the Mandate's inner council was also understanding right now, at this exact moment, from whatever feed they were watching in the Zenith Spire. Not that they had lost a battle. Battles were recoverable. What he understood, sitting in his chair while his fleet drifted and the FTL rings spun slowly in the dark, was that they had lost a category. They had believed that space was made of roads, and humanity had just demonstrated, very quietly, very precisely, and at a cost of lives that the record would have to account for, that space was not made of roads. Space was space. The Caloris Basin medical team reached the first Mandate ships 40 minutes after the drives sheared. They had launched as soon as Rask gave the order, not after the battle was confirmed over, not after the diplomatic situation was assessed. The moment the emitters locked, and it was clear no further strikes were coming, the medical frigates detached and moved toward the drifting armada. The Vesperian crews, locked inside their intact hulls with their life support running and their drives inert, watched through their port windows as human ships approached them with running lights on. No weapons signatures, no targeting locks. Just lights. On the sensor board of the Sovereign of Edicts, Oris's officer said, quietly, "Commander, the human medical ships are there treating our wounded. They're transmitting medical codes." Oris did not answer immediately. He looked at the board. He looked at the medical frigates moving through the debris field of his fleet's own detached drive rings, navigating between them carefully, running lights steady, broadcast codes, identifying them as non-combatant vessels under the same integration charter that Thulmora had decided 48 rotations ago, no longer applied to anyone human. The charter Rask had noted he forgot to formally dissolve before the Exile order, the one that was still, technically, in effect. He had a feeling this would matter later. "Get me a channel to the Zenith Spire," he said. His communications officer tried, and tried again, and then said, with a careful neutrality that Oris recognized as the voice of someone reporting something they did not want to be reporting, "Sir, the channel is already occupied. Someone is broadcasting into the spire from a dark space frequency, unencrypted. There it's going out on every open hololith in the building." Ares looked up from the board. "Who?" His officer turned from the consul. "Consul General Rask, sir." The feed was already live, in every system the Mandate controlled. The feed opened, with no preamble. One moment, the Zenith Spire's primary hololith was showing the Armada's telemetry, a board that had been updating every 30 seconds with position data that was now, uniformly, reporting zero drive output, and then the display simply changed. Not interrupted, not overridden with a warning or a takeover signal. It changed the way a conversation changes when someone enters the room who was going to speak regardless of what was already being discussed. Rask's face resolved on every screen in the building. She was on the bridge of the Caloris Basin. The port side damage was visible behind her, the emergency doors sealed, the wall of the bridge showing a long stress fracture along the structural framing where the thermal barrage had transferred force through the hull. She had not moved to a clean background. She had not waited for the damage to be assessed or the lighting to be adjusted. She was standing where she had been standing when the ship took the hit, and the Zenith Spire was seeing exactly what she wanted it to see. In the gallery above the main chamber, Primarbiter Thulmora stood very still. His liquid metal robes had gone flat, no movement in them at all. His hands were on the rail in front of him, not flat the way they were when he rendered judgments, but gripping it. Virin, watching the feed from his telemetry station, noted the hands without intending to. He had never seen Thulmora grip anything. Rask looked at the camera and waited 3 full seconds before she spoke. She poured a half cup of water from the carafe on the navigation console. She did not drink it. Then she said, "This broadcast is unencrypted and is being transmitted simultaneously on every dark space frequency available to the human fleet. Every system the mandate administers is receiving it. I am going to be brief." 48 rotations ago, Prime Arbiter Thulmora rendered a judgment that removed humanity from the interstellar network and seized 4 of our worlds under an asset clause that had never been applied to a species with a functioning government. He did not dissolve the integration charter before issuing that order. That charter is still in effect. Fleet Commander Oris fired on a human vessel operating under the protections of that charter. The record will show this. She paused. The record will also show the following. She looked down once, not at notes, at something she already knew, and then back at the camera. The crew of the Caloris Basin, who died when Oris fired, numbered 312. I am going to read 11 of their names. She read them, one at a time without commentary. A systems engineer who had served for 19 years. A navigator who had transferred from a deep void survey run to join the fleet because she had worked with Rask in the outer spiral. A medic 3 weeks from the end of his second tour. 8 more. She read each name clearly and did not rush. When she finished, the bridge was quiet. "The record will carry all 312, she said. "These 11 are the ones I knew." She let the silence hold for 2 seconds. "Then humanity is establishing the null boundary. Any mandate vessel crossing into human space with an active weapon core will lose that weapon core in the void. We will not destroy your hulls. We will not harm your crews. We will not occupy your systems or seize your assets under clauses written for dead civilizations. A beat. We are not interested in your roads. We are not interested in your rules. We are not interested in your categories for what we are." She looked directly at the camera. "We are interested in the space between the stars. We have been for a long time. You simply did not notice." In the Zenith Spire, something happened that Virin could not have predicted his models would fail to anticipate. The chamber went quiet in a way that was different from ordinary quiet. Not the quiet of a session between speakers. The quiet of an equation that has just been solved, and the answer has turned out to be wrong in a way that changes the field. No one moved to cut the feed. Rask reached into her satchel. The chalk came out, the same stick, worn down a quarter from decades of survey marks on hulls and paper overlays, and the tide node charts that no mandate database had ever seen. She looked at it for a moment, the same way she had looked at it in the outer spiral when she was making the kind of mark you made when you had finally confirmed something you had been measuring for years. A check, not a celebration. Just, yes, this is where it is. She turned to the primary display on the Caloris Basin's bridge, a glass projection panel that was, at this moment, still showing the Mandate Armada's position plot, all those drive signatures reading 0, all those rings drifting in the dark outside. She pressed the chalk to the glass and drew a line. It was not precise. It was not a navigational boundary drawn to scale. It was a thick, chalky, physical mark on a glass surface, the kind of mark you could make with one motion of the arm, the kind that would not erase cleanly. It ran across the display from left to right, separating the mandate's gate network from the human-controlled deep void lanes, and it left residue on the glass the way chalk always did, a slight ghost of white beyond the line itself, a softness at the edge. The camera caught it clearly. In every system the mandate controlled, on every screen showing the feed, the boundary appeared, not as a projection, not as a filed coordinate set, as a chalk line on glass, visible and physical and made by a human hand, and that was somehow more final than anything the mandate's charter had ever produced. Thul Mora looked at it for a long time. His hands were still gripping the rail. Rask capped the chalk, or rather, set it down on the console beside the carafe of water she had not drunk, and looked at the camera one last time. "The mandate still owns the gates," she said. "They just no longer own the space between them." Then she reached forward and closed the channel. The Zenith Spire did not immediately respond. There was no emergency session called, no counter-broadcast, no mandate-wide address from the inner council. The chamber stayed still for a long time after the feed cut, delegates in their seats, observers in the gallery, Thul Mora at the rail, and what Virin noticed from his station, watching the telemetry boards, was that the secondary communication channels between the 7 mandate species were not showing the usual burst traffic that followed a major session. The channels were quiet. The mandate was not arguing about what had just happened. It was sitting with it. And the silence of an organization that had governed 112 systems for 8 centuries through the absolute control of the only roads between the stars. That silence, in the aftermath of a 14-minute engagement that had left its entire enforcement fleet drifting without drives, was a different kind of quiet than the quiet of before. Virin filed a final report. He titled it simply New Boundary, Null Space, Human Administration. He marked it for the historical record rather than the operational queue because there was nothing operational left to do. His neck ridges had gone dark. Not calm, dark, the way they went when the data had resolved into a shape he understood fully and did not like. He had been the only one to read the absence. He had been the only one who understood, weeks ago, that the ships were not at the gates. He had filed that report to a queue that no one opened in time, and now the first Descendant Armada was drifting in the dark outside 4 worlds that still had their lights on, and human medical ships were moving through the debris of his civilization's certainty with their running lights steady and their broadcast codes clean. He closed the report. He did not send it to his supervisor. He sent it directly to the Arbiter's record. Across the outer band, the Caloris Basin held her position while the medical frigates worked. The stress fracture on the bridge wall had been marked with a survey sticker, the kind the cartography corps used, a small bright square with a handwritten number, by someone who had walked the damage with a clipboard an hour after the strike. Standard procedure. You marked what needed repair so nothing got missed. The chalk was still on the console where Rask had left it. She was not on the bridge anymore. She had walked out as soon as the channel closed, the same way she had walked out of the Zenith Spire, without ceremony, without looking back, with the empty satchel over her shoulder. Captain Ruiz picked up the chalk after she left. He held it for a moment, feeling its weight, which was almost nothing. He set it back down exactly where it had been. On the projection panel, the chalk line was still there. The display had not been cleared. Someone would clear it eventually, when the panel needed to be reset for the next navigation task, and the line would go, and the ghost of it would go, and the glass would be clean again. But for now it remained, a thick, imprecise mark, slightly smudged at one end where the chalk had lifted, separating one half of the known galaxy from the other. Outside, in the dark between the stars, the currents the mandate had declared unnavigable were full of ships that knew the way home.